Margaret Williams had always been the heart of her family. At 78 years old, she possessed the kind of warmth that could fill an entire room with just her smile. Her small cottage on Maple Street had been the gathering place for 3 generations of Williamses, where Sunday dinners turned into storytelling sessions and holidays became magical celebrations that neighbors still talked about years later. But now, as autumn painted the trees in shades of gold and crimson, Margaret lay quietly in the hospice bed that had been carefully positioned by the large window overlooking her beloved garden. The same hands that had kneaded countless loaves of bread, wiped away tears, and held newborn grandchildren now rested peacefully on the soft blue blanket her daughter Sarah had knitted especially for her. The diagnosis had come 6 months earlier, delivered by Dr. Peterson with the kind of gentle honesty that Margaret had always appreciated. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The words had hung in the air of the sterile medical office like a heavy fog, but Margaret had simply nodded, squeezed her son David's hand, and asked about the timeline. She had never been one to waste time on things she couldn't control. What followed was a whirlwind of treatments, second opinions, and moments of hope mixed with the harsh reality of her condition. Margaret approached each chemotherapy session with the same determination she had once used to raise 4 children as a single mother, after her husband passed away unexpectedly when she was only 45. She joked with the nurses, brought homemade cookies to share in the waiting room, and somehow managed to make everyone around her feel better. Even while fighting the battle of her life, Sarah, her eldest daughter, had moved back into the family home immediately after the diagnosis. At 45, Sarah was a successful architect with her own firm, but she dropped everything to care for the woman who had sacrificed so much for her family. The role reversal felt strange at first. Sarah found herself helping her mother with tasks that Margaret had once done effortlessly, but their relationship deepened in ways she never expected. David, the middle child and only son, struggled with watching his mother's decline. As a paramedic, he had seen death many times, but nothing prepared him for watching it approach someone he loved so deeply. He visited every day after his shifts, often arriving still in uniform, and would sit by Margaret's bedside sharing stories from his day, or reading aloud from her favorite mystery novels. The 2 younger daughters, Emma and Lisa, lived in different states but made frequent trips home. Emma, a teacher from Colorado, used her summer break to spend 2 months caring for Margaret, while Lisa, a nurse from Florida, provided medical insights and emotional support to the family during her visits. As the weeks passed, Margaret's condition gradually worsened, but her spirit remained remarkably strong. She spent her good days organizing family photos, writing letters to each of her 7 grandchildren to be opened on their wedding days, and recording video messages for future family milestones she knew she would miss. The kitchen table became covered with boxes of memories she wanted to sort through, ensuring each family member would have something special to remember her by. The grandchildren, ranging in age from 8 to 25, each processed the situation differently. The older ones understood the gravity and spent precious time recording their grandmother's stories and family history. The younger ones simply knew that Grandma Maggie was sick, but continued to climb into bed with her for their traditional story time, their innocent presence bringing immeasurable joy to Margaret's difficult days. Friends from the community began stopping by regularly. Margaret had touched so many lives throughout her years as a school secretary, volunteer at the local food bank, and active member of St. Paul's Methodist Church. Her neighbor Mrs. Chen brought homemade soup every Tuesday. The postal worker, Jim, always lingered a few extra minutes during his deliveries to check on her. Even the young family who had recently moved in across the street felt drawn to help, offering to run errands or simply sit and chat. The house began to transform into a hub of love and memory-making. Photo albums appeared on every surface, filled with decades of family gatherings, vacations, and milestone celebrations. The walls seemed to echo with laughter from years past, while the present moments were treasured with an intensity that made even simple conversations feel profound. As October arrived with its crisp air and falling leaves, Margaret's energy began to fade more noticeably. The conversations she had been dreading but knew were necessary finally took place. She spoke with each of her children individually about her wishes, about how she wanted to be remembered, and about the hopes she had for their futures. These conversations were difficult, but filled with a love so deep that even in sadness, there was beauty. Dr. Peterson's visits became more frequent, and the family understood that the time they had been dreading was approaching. Margaret had always been honest about her wishes to die at home, surrounded by the people and memories she loved most. The hospice team was incredibly supportive, helping the family navigate this difficult transition while ensuring Margaret remained comfortable and dignified. The final week arrived sooner than anyone expected, yet somehow the family felt as prepared as anyone could be for such a moment. The phone calls began on a gray Tuesday morning when Margaret hadn't awakened at her usual time. Dr. Peterson's gentle examination confirmed what the family had been mentally preparing for but emotionally dreading. Margaret had perhaps days, possibly just hours, remaining with them. The hospice nurse, a compassionate woman named Linda who had become like family over the past weeks, helped coordinate what would become the most important gathering the Williams family had ever experienced. Sarah made the first call to David, her voice steady but carrying the weight of the message everyone had known would eventually come. David immediately requested time off from his emergency services job, something he had never done in 15 years of service. His supervisor, understanding the gravity of the situation, told him to take whatever time he needed and that his work family would be thinking of him. The calls to Emma and Lisa were more challenging due to the distance involved. Emma was in the middle of preparing her classroom for the new school year when Sarah's call came through. Without hesitation, she contacted her principal, arranged for a substitute teacher, and booked the next available flight from Denver. The 3-hour journey felt endless as she stared out the airplane window, remembering every conversation she had shared with her mother over the summer. Lisa faced an even more complicated situation. As a nurse in a busy hospital in Miami, she was scheduled for a critical surgery that afternoon. However, her supervisor, also a mother, immediately understood and helped arrange coverage. Lisa's hands shook as she packed a bag, her medical training telling her exactly what her mother's condition meant, while her heart refused to fully accept the reality. Back at the cottage on Maple Street, word spread naturally through the close-knit community. Mrs. Chen appeared at the door with enough food to feed an army, understanding that the family would be too preoccupied to think about meals. Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church arrived quietly, not to preach or offer platitudes, but simply to sit with the family and provide the comfort of his presence. The grandchildren's arrivals created both heart-wrenching and beautiful moments. 25-year-old Michael, David's eldest son, drove straight from his job at the local bank, still wearing his business suit but with tears streaming down his face. He had always been especially close to his grandmother, calling her every Sunday without fail, and seeking her advice on everything from career decisions to relationship troubles. Teenage granddaughter Jessica arrived with her parents from 2 hours away, clutching the handmade scarf Margaret had knitted for her last Christmas. At 16, she was old enough to understand the finality of the situation, but young enough to believe that somehow her presence alone might change the outcome. She immediately went to Margaret's bedside and began reading aloud from the poetry book they had been working through together during summer visits. The younger grandchildren, 8-year-old twins Matthew and Madison, approached the situation with the innocent honesty that only children possess. They climbed carefully onto Margaret's bed, as they had done hundreds of times before, and began chatting about their school projects and playground adventures. Their grandmother's eyes lit up despite her weakened condition, and for brief moments, the room filled with the kind of joy that reminded everyone why these gatherings had always been so special. As the day progressed, Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, but during her alert moments, she made sure to spend individual time with each person present. Her conversations were brief but meaningful, filled with expressions of love, gratitude, and final pieces of wisdom she wanted to share. To Sarah, she expressed pride in the strong, independent woman she had become. To David, she acknowledged his strength and dedication to helping others. To Emma and Lisa, she shared hopes for their continued happiness and success. Extended family members began arriving as well. Margaret's sister Helen, now 81 and Margaret's last surviving sibling, made the journey from the assisted living facility where she now resided. The two women held hands and shared memories spanning 8 decades, their conversation flowing between laughter and tears as they recalled their childhood adventures and the dreams they had shared as young women. Longtime family friends joined the gathering throughout the day. Betty Richardson, Margaret's best friend since high school, sat quietly in the corner knitting, a skill Margaret had taught her 60 years earlier during a particularly difficult period in Betty's life. Their friendship had weathered marriages, divorces, child-rearing challenges, and now this final chapter, proving that some bonds transcend even death. The local florist, knowing about Margaret's condition through the community network, arrived with a beautiful arrangement of sunflowers. Margaret's favorite flower. She had always said they reminded her to look toward the light, even on the darkest days. The bright yellow blooms now graced the bedside table, bringing a touch of Margaret's beloved garden indoors during her final days. Evening approached with an unusual quiet settling over the house. The usual sounds of daily life seemed muted, as if the world itself was showing respect for the profound moment taking place within those walls. Margaret's breathing became more labored, and the family instinctively gathered closer, understanding that their time together was drawing to a close. Linda, the hospice nurse, remained nearby but gave the family space, intervening only to ensure Margaret's comfort. Her experience had taught her that these final moments belonged to the family, and her role was simply to provide support and guidance when needed. She had witnessed many such gatherings and recognized the love and connection that filled this particular home. As night fell, the house took on an almost sacred atmosphere, filled with the quiet conversations, gentle touches, and shared memories that would forever mark this as one of the most significant nights in the Williams family history. Throughout the long night, family members took turns sitting beside Margaret's bed, each person finding their own way to say goodbye. The bedroom had become a sanctuary, where decades of shared experiences seemed to converge into these precious final hours. The soft lighting from the bedside lamp created an intimate atmosphere, while the steady rhythm of Margaret's breathing provided a gentle soundtrack to the vigil. David found himself remembering the countless nights his mother had sat beside his own bed when he was sick as a child. She had always known exactly what to say to make him feel better, whether it was a scraped knee or a broken heart from his first teenage romance. Now, as he held her hand and watched her chest rise and fall with increasing effort, he struggled to find words that could possibly express his gratitude for everything she had given him. Emma sat curled in the old rocking chair that had been in Margaret's bedroom for as long as anyone could remember. This was the same chair where Margaret had nursed all 4 of her children, where she had rocked crying grandchildren back to sleep during family visits, and where she had spent countless hours reading and knitting. The chair seemed to hold decades of love within its worn wooden frame, and Emma found comfort in its familiar creaking as she kept her quiet watch. Sarah moved between practical tasks and emotional moments, her architect's mind naturally organizing the logistics that needed attention, while her heart processed the magnitude of losing her mother. She coordinated with the funeral home, contacted Margaret's financial advisor, and handled the phone calls from extended family members who couldn't travel but wanted to express their love and support. Yet between each task, she returned to her mother's side, sometimes simply sitting in silence, sometimes sharing memories from their shared experiences. Lisa's medical background proved both helpful and emotionally challenging. She understood exactly what was happening to her mother's body and could explain the process to other family members when they had questions. However, this clinical knowledge also made it impossible for her to maintain any illusions about the outcome. She focused on ensuring her mother's comfort, adjusting pillows, monitoring her breathing, and providing the kind of gentle care that came naturally from years of nursing experience, combined with deep filial love. The grandchildren handled the situation according to their ages and personalities. Michael, the oldest, took on a protective role with his younger cousins, making sure they understood what was happening while shielding them from the more difficult aspects of the situation. He organized quiet activities for them and helped answer their questions with the kind of patient honesty that Margaret herself would have appreciated. Jessica continued reading poetry aloud, her young voice bringing life to verses about nature, love, and the passage of time. Margaret's eyes would flutter open occasionally during these readings, and a small smile would cross her face as she listened to words that had brought her comfort throughout her life. The teenager didn't fully understand all the poems she was reading, but she sensed their importance to her grandmother and continued with dedication. The twins, Matthew and Madison, created artwork at the small table in the corner of the room. Their drawings featured stick figure representations of family gatherings, complete with Margaret at the center surrounded by hearts and flowers. They worked with the intense concentration that only children possess, occasionally bringing their creations to show their grandmother, who would nod approvingly and whisper words of praise that filled their young hearts with pride. As dawn approached, Margaret's breathing became more irregular, and the family understood that the end was very near. Linda, the hospice nurse, gently explained what they might expect in these final moments, helping them understand that the changes they were witnessing were natural parts of the dying process. Her calm presence and professional expertise provided comfort during this most difficult time. Margaret's sister Helen had fallen asleep in the armchair beside the window, her hand still reaching toward the bed where her younger sister lay. Even in sleep, her face showed the profound sadness of someone preparing to lose the last connection to her childhood and shared history. Their brother had passed away 10 years earlier, making Margaret's death particularly significant as it marked the end of their generation. Pastor Williams had remained throughout the night, not speaking unless spoken to, but providing the quiet strength that his presence represented. He had officiated at Margaret's wedding 40 years earlier, baptized all 4 of her children, and provided counsel during the difficult period following her husband's death. His continued presence during this final chapter seemed fitting and brought comfort to the family. Friends continued to arrive even in the early morning hours. Word had spread through the community about Margaret's condition, and people felt compelled to pay their respects to a woman who had touched so many lives. The kitchen filled with casseroles, flowers, and cards from neighbors, co-workers, and community organizations where Margaret had volunteered over the years. The mail carrier, Jim, stopped by before beginning his route, not to deliver mail but to say goodbye to someone who had always greeted him with a smile and homemade cookies during the holidays. The young mother from across the street brought coffee for the family, understanding that simple gestures often mean the most during difficult times. As the sun began to rise, casting gentle light through the bedroom window, Margaret's eyes opened one final time. She looked around the room, taking in the faces of everyone she loved most in the world. Her lips moved slightly, though no sound emerged, but everyone present understood that she was expressing her love and gratitude for the gift of having them all together for this final goodbye. The moment everyone had been dreading yet somehow preparing for was finally at hand, and the room filled with a profound sense of both loss and love, as Margaret began her final journey surrounded by the people who had made her life meaningful. At exactly 7:32 on that quiet Wednesday morning, Margaret Williams took her last breath. The room fell into a profound silence that seemed to extend far beyond the walls of the small cottage. For a moment, time itself appeared to pause as the family absorbed the reality that the woman who had been the cornerstone of their lives was no longer with them. The sunlight streaming through the window seemed softer somehow, as if even nature was acknowledging the passing of someone special. Sarah was the first to move, reaching over to gently close her mother's eyes and smooth the gray hair that had once been dark brown, but had turned silver with age and wisdom. Her movements were tender and deliberate, performing this final act of care with the same love that Margaret had shown her children throughout their lives. The simple gesture somehow transformed the moment from one of pure sadness to something that contained both grief and grace. David, despite his experience as a paramedic dealing with death professionally, found himself overwhelmed by emotions he had never experienced before. This wasn't a stranger whose life he was trying to save or a patient he was transporting to the hospital. This was his mother, the woman who had taught him to tie his shoes, helped him with homework, and celebrated every achievement in his life. He stood quietly at the foot of the bed, tears flowing freely as he struggled to process the magnitude of his loss. Linda, the hospice nurse, stepped forward with the quiet professionalism that comes from years of helping families through these moments. She checked for vital signs, noted the time, and then stepped back to allow the family their private time with Margaret. Her presence was comforting but unobtrusive, understanding that her role now was to support the family while they began the difficult process of saying their final goodbyes. Emma and Lisa held each other, sisters united in their shared loss and the memories of a mother who had always been their strongest supporter. They remembered childhood moments when Margaret had bandaged their scraped knees, helped them through difficult school projects, and provided comfort during teenage heartbreaks. Now they faced their first major life challenge without her guidance, but they drew strength from each other and from the values she had instilled in them. The grandchildren reacted according to their ages and understanding. Michael, now the oldest male family member present, felt a sudden weight of responsibility that he had never experienced before. Jessica continued holding her grandmother's hand, reluctant to let go of the physical connection that had now become a memory. The twins, Matthew and Madison, asked innocent questions about what happened next, their young minds trying to understand why Grandma Maggie wouldn't wake up anymore. Margaret's sister Helen awakened to the changed atmosphere in the room and immediately understood what had occurred. At 81 years old, she had experienced the deaths of parents, her husband, siblings, and many friends, but losing Margaret felt particularly profound. They had shared 8 decades of memories, from childhood adventures to raising their own families, and now Helen faced the reality of being the last surviving member of her generation. Pastor Williams offered a simple prayer of thanksgiving for Margaret's life and comfort for the family, his words gentle and appropriate for the sacred moment they were experiencing. His prayer didn't try to explain the unexplainable or offer empty platitudes about God's plan, but simply acknowledged the love that had filled Margaret's life and the impact she had made on everyone who knew her. The next few hours passed in a blur of necessary tasks, mixed with profound emotions. Linda helped coordinate with the funeral home, explaining the process while ensuring the family had as much time as they needed before Margaret's body was transported. The family used this time to share final memories, take turns saying private goodbyes, and begin the difficult transition from caring for Margaret to planning her memorial. Friends and neighbors, who had been waiting respectfully outside, began to arrive as word spread through the community. Mrs. Chen brought fresh flowers from her garden, while other neighbors offered their condolences and practical help. The house began to fill with people who wanted to honor Margaret's memory and support the family during their time of grief. Betty Richardson, Margaret's oldest friend, sat quietly beside the bed sharing stories that only she could tell. She spoke about their teenage years, their early marriages, the challenges they had faced raising children, and the dreams they had shared throughout their long friendship. Her stories brought smiles even through the tears, reminding everyone that Margaret's life had been full of joy and meaningful relationships. The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors, each person carrying their own memories of how Margaret had touched their lives. Former students from the elementary school where she had worked as a secretary for 20 years came to pay their respects. Volunteers from the food bank where she had served meals every Saturday morning shared stories of her kindness and dedication. Members of her church quilting circle brought the blanket they had been working on together, wanting Margaret to have it even though she could no longer appreciate their handiwork. As evening approached, the immediate family found themselves alone again with Margaret for the last time. They had made the difficult decision to have her body transported to the funeral home the following morning, wanting one final night to adjust to their new reality, while she remained in the home she had loved so much. David suggested they share their favorite memories of their mother, and what followed was hours of storytelling that brought both laughter and tears. They remembered her terrible cooking attempts when they were young, before she finally learned to make the amazing meals they all remembered from their teenage years. They recalled her determination to learn to drive at age 43 after their father's death, and how she had practiced in the church parking lot every Sunday after services until she felt confident enough to venture onto the main roads. Sarah shared the story of how Margaret had supported her decision to study architecture, even when well-meaning relatives suggested it wasn't a practical career for a woman. Emma remembered their mother attending every school play, soccer game, and academic competition, always cheering the loudest and taking pictures that now filled dozens of photo albums. Lisa recalled how Margaret had encouraged her to pursue nursing, recognizing her natural compassion and desire to help others. The grandchildren contributed their own memories, from secret cookie baking sessions to special grandmother-grandchild outings that had created lasting bonds. Even the youngest ones shared their recollections, their innocent perspectives adding brightness to the evening and reminding everyone that Margaret's legacy would continue through their memories and the values she had taught them. The following morning brought the difficult moment when Margaret's body would be transported to the funeral home. The family had spent the night taking turns keeping vigil, none of them wanting to leave her alone during these final hours in the home she had cherished for over 30 years. As the representatives from Coleman Funeral Home arrived with quiet dignity and respectful professionalism, the family gathered for one last goodbye in the bedroom that had witnessed so much of their family's history. Sarah had awakened early to call Margaret's employer at the school district, her financial advisor, and the various organizations where she had volunteered. Each conversation was difficult, but the responses were uniformly filled with expressions of love and offers of support. Margaret's impact on her community became even more apparent as people learned of her passing and shared their own memories of her kindness and generosity. The logistics of planning a funeral while grieving proved challenging, but the family found strength in working together to create a service that would honor Margaret's memory appropriately. David took charge of coordinating with the funeral home, his emergency services background, helping him handle the practical details while his sisters focused on the more personal aspects of the planning. Emma used her organizational skills as a teacher to create a timeline for the visitation and funeral service, ensuring that all the people who wanted to pay their respects would have the opportunity to do so. She reached out to Margaret's former colleagues, church members, and community organizations to inform them of the arrangements and invite them to share their memories. Lisa's medical background proved helpful in explaining Margaret's condition to extended family members who lived far away and couldn't make the journey for her final days. She handled the difficult conversations with grace, helping distant relatives understand what had happened while sharing information about the upcoming services. The children began the process of going through Margaret's personal belongings, a task that proved both heartbreaking and healing. Each item seemed to hold memories and stories, from the jewelry box that had belonged to Margaret's own mother, to the collection of cookbooks filled with handwritten notes and modifications to recipes. They decided to take their time with this process, understanding that rushing through her possessions would somehow diminish the respect they wanted. To show for her life and memories, Margaret's bedroom was carefully preserved, exactly as it had been during her final days, with family members taking turns sitting in the space where they had shared so many meaningful conversations during her illness. The sunflowers by the window continued to bloom, their bright faces serving as a reminder of Margaret's philosophy of always looking toward the light even during dark times. The grandchildren found their own ways to process their grief and honor their grandmother's memory. Michael took on increased responsibility for his younger cousins, helping them understand the funeral process and what to expect during the coming days. His maturity and compassion reminded everyone of the values Margaret had instilled in her family. Jessica continued reading the poetry book she and Margaret had been working through together, finding comfort in the verses that had brought her grandmother joy. She decided to read one of Margaret's favorite poems during the funeral service, a gesture that would have made her grandmother immensely proud. The twins, Matthew and Madison, created a special memory book filled with drawings and short stories about their adventures with Grandma Maggie. Their innocent artwork captured the joy and love that had characterized their relationship, providing a bright spot during these difficult days. Pastor Williams met with the family to plan the funeral service, listening carefully to their stories and memories to ensure that his remarks would truly reflect Margaret's life and character. He had known Margaret for over 20 years and had witnessed her faith, her dedication to her family, and her service to the community. The service he planned would celebrate her life rather than simply mourning her death. The community response to Margaret's passing was overwhelming and heartwarming. The local newspaper ran a lengthy obituary that detailed her contributions to the school system, her volunteer work, and her role as a beloved family matriarch. The food bank where she had volunteered announced that they would dedicate their next community meal in her honor. The church quilting circle decided to donate the blanket they had been making to a local homeless shelter, knowing that Margaret would have approved of helping those in need. Former students and colleagues began sharing memories on social media and through phone calls to the family. Teachers remembered how Margaret had always remembered their birthdays and had been there to listen during difficult times. Students recalled her gentle encouragement and the way she had made the school office feel welcoming and safe. These stories provided comfort to the family and reinforced their understanding of how deeply Margaret had touched the lives of others. Betty Richardson spent hours with the family, sharing photographs and mementos from their decades-long friendship. Her stories provided insights into aspects of Margaret's life that even her children hadn't fully understood, painting a picture of a woman who had faced challenges with grace and had found joy in simple pleasures and meaningful relationships. The evening before the visitation, the family gathered once more in Margaret's living room. Surrounded by photo albums and memory books that chronicled 8 decades of a life well lived, they spent hours looking through pictures, sharing stories, and helping the younger grandchildren understand their family history and the legacy their grandmother had created. Sarah found Margaret's journal from the months following her husband's death, entries that revealed the strength and determination that had carried her through one of the most difficult periods of her life. Reading her mother's private thoughts about raising 4 children alone, returning to work, and maintaining hope for the future gave Sarah new appreciation for the woman who had always seemed unshakable. The family decided that Margaret's cottage would remain in the family, with Sarah moving in permanently to preserve the home where so many memories had been created. The house would continue to serve as a gathering place for family celebrations and holidays, ensuring that Margaret's tradition of bringing people together would continue for future generations. As they prepared for the public visitation the following day, the family felt a mixture of sadness for their loss and gratitude for the time they had been given with such an extraordinary woman. They knew that the coming days would be difficult, but they also understood that they were carrying forward Margaret's values of love, kindness, and community service. The visitation at Coleman Funeral Home exceeded everyone's expectations in terms of attendance and the outpouring of love for Margaret. The family had scheduled 4 hours for people to pay their respects, but the line of visitors extended out the door and around the building throughout the entire time. People of all ages came to honor a woman who had somehow touched each of their lives in meaningful ways. The funeral home had provided a spacious room decorated with the sunflowers that Margaret had loved so much. Photo displays created by Emma showed Margaret throughout different phases of her life, from her childhood in the 1940s through her recent role as a beloved grandmother. The images told the story of a woman who had embraced each stage of life with grace and enthusiasm. Sarah stood near the casket, greeting the hundreds of people who came to share their memories and offer their condolences. Each conversation revealed another aspect of her mother's impact on the community. Former students, now adults with children of their own, shared stories of how Margaret's kindness had helped them through difficult childhood moments. Teachers spoke of her reliability and the way she had made their jobs easier through her thoughtful attention to detail. David found himself amazed by the diversity of people who came to pay their respects. There were elderly community members who had known Margaret for decades, young families from the neighborhood who had been recipients of her generosity, and middle-aged professionals who remembered her from their school days. The common thread in all their stories was Margaret's ability to make each person feel valued and important. Emma had created a memory book where visitors could write their favorite memories of Margaret, and the stories that filled its pages painted a picture of someone who had lived her values every day. A local grocery store clerk wrote about how Margaret always asked about his family and remembered details about his children's activities. A young mother shared how Margaret had helped her during a difficult period by providing childcare and emotional support without being asked. Lisa was touched by the number of medical professionals who attended, many of whom had cared for Margaret during her illness. They spoke not only of her grace and courage during treatment, but also of how she had brightened their days with her positive attitude and concern for their well-being. Even during her own struggle with cancer, Margaret had continued to think about others and find ways to bring joy to difficult situations. The grandchildren took turns standing with their parents, learning important lessons about community, legacy, and the impact one person can have on many lives. Michael served as a pallbearer alongside his father and uncles, accepting the responsibility with the maturity that his grandmother had always seen in him. Jessica read names from the guest book, amazed by the number of people and the variety of their connections to her grandmother. Pastor Williams moved through the crowd, offering comfort to the family, while also greeting many of his parishioners who had come to honor Margaret's memory. He collected stories and memories that would help him personalize the funeral service, understanding that his role was to help the community celebrate Margaret's life and find meaning in their loss. Betty Richardson had positioned herself near the photo displays, serving as an informal historian who could provide context for the images and answer questions about Margaret's earlier life. Her presence was invaluable in helping visitors understand the full scope of Margaret's journey and the experiences that had shaped her into the remarkable woman they remembered. The evening visitation brought an even larger crowd, as people who worked during the day made time to pay their respects. The food bank volunteers came as a group, sharing stories of Margaret's Saturday morning service and her ability to make every client feel welcome and dignified. They had created a special photo collage showing Margaret in action, serving meals and organizing food donations with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything in her life. Representatives from various community organizations attended, including the library board where Margaret had served for 10 years, the historical society where she had volunteered to organize archives, and the elementary school parent-teacher organization that she had supported long after her own children graduated. Each group had prepared statements about Margaret's contributions, creating a comprehensive picture of someone who had truly served her community. The final hour of visitation brought the most emotional moments as close friends and extended family members took their last opportunities to say goodbye. Margaret's surviving cousins traveled from several states to attend, sharing childhood memories that brought both laughter and tears. Her former neighbors from the house where she had lived before moving to Maple Street came to honor the woman who had been like family to them during their children's growing years. As the visitation concluded, the family spent a few private moments with Margaret before the casket was closed for the final time. Each person said their personal goodbye, leaving small mementos that represented their relationship with her. Sarah placed a photo of the family's most recent Christmas gathering. David left his paramedic badge, representing the career path she had inspired him to pursue. Emma included a letter from her current students thanking Margaret for her volunteer work in their classroom. Lisa added a small medical symbol, acknowledging how Margaret's grace during illness had influenced her nursing practice. The grandchildren each left something special as well. Michael included a copy of his college acceptance letter, which Margaret had proudly displayed on her refrigerator. Jessica left the poetry book they had been reading together, with bookmarks on all of Margaret's favorite verses. The twins drew pictures of sunflowers, remembering their grandmother's love for the bright blooms that always made her smile. The evening ended with the family gathering at Margaret's cottage for a quiet meal, prepared by neighbors and friends. The house felt different without her presence, but it was also filled with the warmth of shared memories and the understanding that her influence would continue through the values she had instilled in her family and the example she had set for her community as they prepared for the funeral service the following day. The family reflected on the overwhelming response to Margaret's passing and the clear evidence that her life had been meaningful and impactful. They felt a deep sense of responsibility to carry forward her legacy of kindness, service, and love that had touched so many lives throughout the community. The kitchen table was covered with cards, flowers, and donations to various charities that people had made in Margaret's honor. The sheer volume of tributes served as a testament to the difference one person could make through consistent acts of love and service. The family realized that their grief, while profound and personal, was shared by an entire community that had lost someone truly special. Sarah found herself answering phone calls late into the evening from people who had just learned of Margaret's passing and wanted to share their memories or offer assistance. Each conversation reinforced her understanding of the remarkable woman her mother had been and the responsibility she now carried to preserve and continue Margaret's legacy of community involvement and family devotion. The funeral service at St. Paul's Methodist Church drew the largest crowd in the building's 90-year history. Every pew was filled, with additional chairs set up in the aisles and fellowship hall to accommodate the overflow of mourners who came to celebrate Margaret's life. The sanctuary was transformed into a garden of sunflowers, their bright yellow petals creating a visual celebration that Margaret herself would have loved. Pastor Williams delivered a eulogy that perfectly captured Margaret's spirit and impact on the community. He spoke of her unwavering faith, her dedication to family, and her quiet but consistent service to others. Rather than focusing on the sadness of loss, he emphasized the joy and love that Margaret had brought into the world, and the legacy she left behind in the lives she had touched. The service included musical selections that reflected Margaret's favorites, performed by the church choir she had supported for over 20 years. Her granddaughter Jessica read the poem that she and Margaret had been working through together, her young voice strong and clear as she shared verses about love enduring beyond death and the continuation of spirit through memory. Michael spoke on behalf of the grandchildren, sharing stories that brought both laughter and tears to the assembled crowd. He talked about Margaret's terrible attempts at video games when trying to connect with her younger grandchildren, her insistence on learning about social media to stay current with their lives, and her amazing ability to remember every important detail about each grandchild's interests and activities. David represented the children with remarks that focused on Margaret's strength as a single mother and her unwavering support for her family's dreams and ambitions. He shared how she had worked multiple jobs to ensure her children could pursue their education, how she had celebrated every achievement no matter how small, and how she had provided a stable foundation that allowed them all to build successful lives. The community response during the service was overwhelming. Representatives from the school district presented a resolution honoring Margaret's 20 years of service. The food bank director announced the establishment of the Margaret Williams Memorial Fund to provide holiday meals for families in need. The library board dedicated their new children's reading garden to her memory, acknowledging her years of volunteer work organizing literacy programs. Following the service, the procession to Restland Cemetery was one of the longest the community had ever seen. Cars filled with mourners stretched for over a mile, creating a visible testament to the impact one person's life had made on an entire community. The burial service was intimate, attended only by immediate family and closest friends, providing a peaceful conclusion to the public celebration of Margaret's life. At the graveside, each family member placed a single sunflower on the casket, their bright blooms creating a beautiful farewell tribute. The twins, Matthew and Madison, had written letters to their grandmother that they placed beside the flowers, their innocent expressions of love providing a touching reminder of how Margaret's influence would continue through the youngest generation. The afternoon reception at the church fellowship hall brought together people from every aspect of Margaret's life. Former students mingled with church members, neighbors shared stories with work colleagues, and family friends connected with community volunteers. The gathering became a celebration of not just Margaret's life, but of the community bonds she had helped create and strengthen over the decades. Stories shared during the reception revealed the true extent of Margaret's quiet generosity. A young father spoke of how Margaret had secretly paid for his daughter's school supplies when his family faced financial difficulties. An elderly widow shared how Margaret had checked on her weekly and helped with grocery shopping without ever making her feel like a burden. A teenage mother talked about how Margaret's non-judgmental support had helped her complete high school and pursue nursing school. The family was amazed to learn about many of Margaret's acts of kindness that she had never mentioned to them. Her humility and desire to help others without recognition had meant that many of her most meaningful contributions were known only to their recipients. These revelations deepened their understanding of the woman they thought they knew completely and increased their appreciation for the example she had set. As the reception continued into the evening, the family found themselves surrounded by a community that felt like extended family. The connections Margaret had fostered through her years of service and kindness had created a network of support that would help them through their grief and continue her legacy of caring for others. The day concluded with the immediate family returning to Margaret's cottage on Maple Street, where they sat in her living room, sharing final reflections on the remarkable send-off their community had provided. The house felt both empty without her presence and full of the love that had been demonstrated throughout the day. Emma suggested that they begin planning an annual community service day in Margaret's honor, bringing together all the organizations where she had volunteered to tackle projects that would benefit the entire community. Lisa proposed establishing a scholarship fund for local students, pursuing education and helping professions, knowing that Margaret would have wanted to continue supporting young people's dreams. Sarah announced her decision to leave her architecture firm and establish a nonprofit organization focused on community development, using her professional skills to continue Margaret's work of bringing people together and improving their shared environment. David committed to organizing annual blood drives at the fire station, honoring his mother's belief in giving back to the community that had supported their family. The grandchildren made their own commitments to honor their grandmother's memory. Michael decided to volunteer at the food bank where Margaret had served, continuing her Saturday morning tradition. Jessica joined the church youth group's community service committee, finding ways to engage her peers in volunteer activities. Even the youngest grandchildren promised to plant sunflowers in their own yards, ensuring that Margaret's favorite flowers would bloom in her honor each summer. As the family prepared to leave the cottage that night, they realized that while Margaret was physically gone, her influence would continue through their actions and the community connections she had fostered. The final gathering had become not just a goodbye, but a commitment to carry forward the values and traditions that had made Margaret Williams such an extraordinary woman. The porch light remained on as they locked the door, a symbol of the welcome that Margaret had always extended to others, and the ongoing invitation for family and friends to continue gathering in the home where so much love had been shared. Her legacy lived on in the hearts of all who had known her, and in the community that had been enriched by her presence for 78 remarkable years.